state managed, locally executed, and federally supported. We have been in contact with our federal partners as well. I have signed the preliminary state of emergency for our state, and we will continue to monitor as more assets, if and when they are needed. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Director Michelle.
Thank you, Governor. I'd like to talk about really just two things today. First of all is the risk of this storm, and then a little bit about our preparations. First of all, as the Governor has said, this storm is projected to make landfall as a lower end Category 1 hurricane. I want to remind everyone to not be complacent about this, to not take this for granted, and for this reason. This storm, I spoke with Ken Graham with the National Hurricane Center first thing this morning. We talked about this storm and the nastiness of this storm. As this storm makes landfall sometime early Tuesday morning, it's going to make landfall on or about the same time as high tide would. That means that the storm surge and the high tide are only going to work against one another, and you're going to have a large amount of storm surge. There's going to be a lot of rain. Once this storm makes landfall, if you've been tracking the storm's track, you're going to notice it will make a very sharp northeasterly turn. That's going to cause this storm to almost stall, which is going to dump large amounts of rain on top of the storm surge, and the storm surge is going to act against the rainfall and almost trap it. So the water's not going to have any ways to go out. So the high risk of flash flooding, particularly in Hancock and Pearl River County that are projected to get 15 plus inches of rain, that's a lot of rain. It's a lot of rain working against a storm surge. So if you live along the coastal counties in these areas, and even as far to the east as Jackson County, can expect storm surge and rain as well. But the concentration of that rain is pretty much going to be there in the Hancock County and Pearl River County. This storm system, because it's going to move slow, is probably going to persist over most portions of the state for basically 48 hours. So a lot of rain going to be dumped on in the state of Mississippi over the course of that period of time. So let's talk about the resources that we've got out. General Boyles is going to talk about his assets here just a little bit, but we have leaned forward a little bit more than we normally would with a storm like this because we are concerned about the flash flooding. So we've got additional high water vehicles that have been staged in the vicinity, either with Camp Shelby or at CRTC. We also have got an IMAT team from FEMA that are going to be integrated with us throughout this period of time. We've already made preparation with sandbags to the counties. Shelter operations being prepared for right now. The evacuations in those counties will be handled at the county level, and then based on when and where they evacuate citizens, then shelters will be made available at that time. But final comment, do not take this storm for granted. A lot can happen between now and our next updates in the morning. This storm could get could become greater than a Category 1. Reminder to you what happened with Laura. That storm was not forecast to be anything greater than a Cat 2. It came ashore as a Cat 4, very devastating storm. So stay alert, pay attention to the directions that come out of your emergency management personnel over the next 24, 48 hours. Thank you, Governor.
Thank you, Director Michelle. I just want to reiterate something that he just said because I think it's important. I stood here before you on a Saturday morning a couple of weeks ago. This was prior to Laura hitting landfall, and we projected on that Saturday morning, based upon all of the experts, and that one storm would hit first, and the second storm, which turned out to be Laura, would hit second. And within literally 8 hours, once they got into the Gulf, things changed. And we know better than most that is certainly possible. But we certainly are giving you the best information that we have today. We are very confident that the east side of this storm is going to hit Mississippi, but we'll as we get closer and closer get even better information. But our job, as it always is in these storms, is to prepare for the worst case scenario, to pray for the best case scenario, and expect somewhere in between. And our emergency management personnel at the state level certainly are very capable, very competent, and that is true at the local level as well. And there are none more capable and competent than our members of our Mississippi National Guard. And so I'm going to ask General Boyles to come up and talk about the assets that he has ready and able and willing to participate should search and rescue missions be necessary. General Bowles?
Governor, thank you. The Mississippi Guard always has military assets on the coast for hurricane events just like this. For this event, this is a little bit different in that we're pre-positioning some assets at Camp Shelby to allow us to either pivot to the coast if needed, but to also pivot to the southwest portion of the Mississippi down 59 in case Pearl River or Hancock County takes additional surge. We always have our aviation assets available. We particularly at this particular time have all of our aviation assets available in the state for any lift capacity, and we are also always poised with our military policemen to support local law enforcement if they need that extra security piece. So, Governor, we're ready to respond and prepared to be on the coast if we need be. Thank you.
Thank you, General Bowles. Thank you, Director Michelle. Just a couple of other comments because I think it's really important. This is one of those scenarios where if things occur exactly the way it is currently projected, it is going to affect certainly our coastal region with significant amounts of rainfall. But as it currently is projected, the eye of the storm would actually enter into Mississippi somewhere around Columbia. And so our southwest part of our state is going to be affected immensely as well. And so I want to make sure that we put everyone in our state on notice, but particularly those in the coastal region as well as in the southwest part of our state in that Tylertown, Columbia area between Macomb and Hattiesburg, which would be critical that we are paying very close attention. Just a couple of things I wanted to mention because I think it's important. I want to personally say to those family members of the two officers that were shot in LA County overnight that the people of Mississippi are thinking about them and praying for them. I think that's a horrific occurrence, and I am praying that justice is done with respect to that. And I'll also tell you that the men and women who wear the uniform here in Mississippi, our first responders are our heroes, and they will be ready to assist in the days to come. As I mentioned earlier, we have been working and communicating closely with our federal, state, and local partners. I know that just in the last short period of time, we have communicated with Congressman Palazzo's office and his team, as well as Lieutenant Governor Hoseman is here in the building now, and we appreciate his partnership as we work together to make a real difference for our people in what we had predicted and projected was going to be a very challenging hurricane season, and that is certainly coming to fruition. So with that, I'll open the floor to questions. Yes, sir.
Yes, this is for Director Michelle. When it comes to sandbag utilization and things like that, preparing for the floods, what's utilization looking like right now, and how can people find out where they can get their own sandbags to prepare their homes?
Yeah, so sandbags, we always keep a large quantity of sandbags on the coast, and those are handled at the county level. Then the county emergency managers, they will make sand and sandbags available for constituents to come and get those. I believe we've delivered somewhere in the neighborhood of about 100,000. Matter of fact, the truck was leaving this morning as I came in to take another load down, and that is in addition to what those counties have. So if anyone is looking for sandbags, most of the individuals that live on those coastal counties know to contact their local EMA director, and they'd be more than happy to facilitate getting them sand and sandbags.
Yes, ma'am.
I'd like to piggyback off of that as well. If things do get as bad as it might be, our assets and resources are already expended through being there for our neighbors in Louisiana because of Laura. And you guys are saying that we have resources available. Will it be enough for how bad it might get?
Yes, without question, we will make the resources available. One of the things about emergency management that we in Mississippi know better than most is if we could not provide the necessary resources internally, we have great partnerships and relationships with our neighboring states, and should we need additional assistance, we will reach out to them and they will provide that assistance. And I'll just give you an example. General Boyles and I have had no less than 5 different conversations over the last couple of weeks in terms of the potential, some of which have come to fruition, some of which have not, the potential for our neighboring states, whether it be Louisiana or Texas during Hurricane Laura, or even potentially California during these very devastating forest fires that they are dealing with. We make our assets available to them should they need it, whether it be flying assets, search and rescue, things such as that, when they are hit. And should we need additional resources, which, by the way, we do not anticipate or expect at this time, but should we need additional resources, they will be made available. We will do everything in our power to make sure that occurs. We are in a state that went through many natural disasters in the last 15 to 20 years, not the least of which was Hurricane Katrina. And so we have a great deal of experience. We also have a great deal of very caring and very talented people. And so when it comes to the necessary boats, for instance, or the necessary high water teams, when you combine the assets not only that we have internally, when you look at the number of teams that the counties, particularly in the coastal region, have, the assets that the Mississippi National Guard has, as well as the Mississippi Highway Patrol and others, we will do everything in our power to assist anyone who is in need. Having said that, let me also point out that the people in Hancock and Pearl River and Harrison and Jackson counties that live in low-lying areas, this is not news to them. They are aware that they live in low-lying areas, and whether it is made mandatory, which is very possible early tomorrow in each of these counties, that you do leave low-lying areas or not, I am telling you it is very likely that we're going to get significant amounts of rainfall. It is very likely that the landfall of the eye of the hurricane, regardless of where it hits, it's very likely that it's going to hit at a time in which there is high tide, and so which is, we would expect nothing less than 2020, right? But it is certainly it needs to be understood by all of our friends in the coastal region and in South Mississippi that if you live in low-lying areas, the time to get out is early tomorrow morning. Do not try to get out at 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning on Monday night or Tuesday morning, because at that point it's going to be too late. As I said before, we are going to have teams to assist, but we want to minimize the amount of time and the amount of rescues, if at all possible, that we put those men and women in harm's way. And so that's the reason we're trying to alert everyone as best we can, because we want to make sure that we mitigate any real challenges.
WLX has a question. WLX?
Governor, can you hear me?
I can now hear you. Thank you.
All right, Governor, Director Michelle has said, of course, that the evacuations are county run. However, do you recommend evacuations? And if so, are you confident about the capacity of the evacuation shelters we have now, given the COVID-19 concerns?
Well, clearly COVID-19 complicates sheltering. We have been saying that ever since the third largest tornado in American history hit Mississippi back on Easter Sunday. Sheltering is more complicated because of COVID-19. And so we strongly encourage those who can to shelter at a neighbor's house or at a friend's place or at a loved one's house or a place of residence, and not use the public shelters. But we will have public shelters open and available if necessary. With respect to evacuations and mandatory evacuations, I will tell you that our team has been in very close contact, as we often are, with the local emergency management officials. And I think the decision has been made at this point that any mandatory evacuations will be determined first thing in the morning based upon what this storm does over the next 12 hours or so. And so we'll continue to work with them, but we are going to support those decisions. And if sheltering becomes necessary, and it very likely will, we will have shelters open, we will have them available, but it is going to be more challenging, and we are encouraging those who can go to a cousin's house or a loved one's house. It would be very helpful both for you and for us in this COVID-19 world.
Hunter has a question. Hunter?
Thank you, Renee. Thank you, Governor. Two questions for you, Governor. The first one would be, when is, well, first off, have you declared an emergency and have you applied to the president for a federal emergency? And the second question would be, what level do we need to, if it comes to that, where we have a mandatory evacuation? Thank you.
Yeah, so to answer your first question, the answer is yes. Earlier this afternoon, I signed both a state of emergency for the state of Mississippi and a request to President Trump to provide the necessary guidance, as it were, for all pre-landfall activity. For example, the pre-positioning of National Guard assets, the pre-positioning of MEMA and FEMA resources certainly should be reimbursable under the Stafford Act, and we have applied for that and feel confident that we will be successful in getting help from the federal government as it relates to that. And in regards to your second question, unless things change, if we continue to expect landfall to be in and around Port Sulphur, Louisiana, as we currently do, and if we continue to expect this to hit around mean high tide, and if we continue to expect between 15 and 20 inches of rain for certain areas like Hancock County and Pearl River County, it is highly, highly likely that we are going to require mandatory evacuations in low-lying areas, particularly in those counties. Obviously, in many areas, 3 to 4 to 5 inches of rain over a short period of time leads to significant flooding issues. You can imagine what 15 to 20 inches over a 24-hour period can do in those areas. And so, but look, the people of the Gulf Coast that live in low-lying areas know that they live in low-lying areas. It is time for them to prepare, and they know that, and I'm confident that they're doing exactly that. Yes, sir.
Y'all talked about the sustained efforts, or the sustained worries about the large amounts of rain. But what about the sustained winds that might happen over the 24 to 48 hours as the hurricane stalls over our area?
I would expect sustained winds to be felt in our Mississippi Gulf Coast region starting sometime tomorrow. Right now, the expectation is that those sustained winds would be in the 75 to 80 mile per hour range, which is what makes it a Category 1 hurricane. But I'll also remind you that at this point in Hurricane Laura, it was expected that it would probably be about what we're looking at now, which is a Cat 1, maybe a low Cat 2, and then over literally an 18 to 24 hour period, it strengthened significantly and actually made landfall in western Louisiana near the Texas border as a Cat 4 storm. And so I've tried throughout 2020 and all of the different challenges that we face to just be absolutely honest with the people of Mississippi. And the honest assessment today is we know what we expect, but we also know to expect the unexpected. And so right now we expect it to make landfall as a Cat 1 hurricane, 75 to 80 miles per hour sustained winds. But I will feel more confident with our projections after we get that early AM report tomorrow. after we see how far it's moved throughout the Gulf. Has it sped up? Has it slowed down? Has it fizzled or has it strengthened? We will know more tomorrow. But the time to start planning if you live on the Mississippi Gulf Coast, and the time to start planning if you live really west or south of Hattiesburg is now. And we'll determine, we'll make more projections sometime tomorrow. Seeing no, yes ma'am.
Can I ask about the alarms? Sounding of alarms for when storms are coming. A lot of folks from the previous storms have said that they didn't get any alerts. Does that still exist, and are we still enforcing that, and is that something that might pick up as the season continues?
Yeah, I'm going to let Greg address the sounding of alarms, but you remind me of something that I should have already mentioned, because it's important, because there are a lot of people watching this press briefing today that maybe don't live in and around Columbia or don't live in Hancock or Harrison or Pearl River counties, and they may say, well, we're going to get some rain, but it's going to be okay. The thing that I want to point out that I should have said earlier is the National Weather Service has alerted us to the fact that this particular storm appears to have a high probability of tornadoes spinning out of it. So tornadic activity is very possible, if not likely, during the storm. Let's think back to Hurricane Katrina for just a second. I know we do that often, but when you think about the number of fatalities that occurred in Jones County, for instance, that was due in large part to a tornado that had spun out of that hurricane. And so we do think that there is significant possibilities of tornadic activity, not limited just to those counties that we've mentioned, but throughout the state of Mississippi. And so everybody in our state needs to be weather aware over the next 72 hours. Let me say that again. Everybody in Mississippi needs to be weather aware over the next 72 hours, because there are possibilities of tornadoes and tornadic activity potentially throughout our entire state. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Greg.
Thank you, Governor. That's a very good question. So the short answer on the tornado alarms across the state is that it's not the same everywhere. And there's a lot of reasons for that. Number one is those alarms require sustained maintenance. Some counties don't have the tax revenue to keep those up. And that is somewhat of an old, antiquated alert system, but it is still used relatively a lot in a lot of places. What we do use for tornadic alerts and any other severe weather alerts is a number of things. First of all, the Misswind emergency communication system was put in after Katrina. We now equip all of our National Weather Service personnel have Misswind radios. So whenever they see alerts that pop up, or wind alerts, or an anomaly that would indicate a tornadic threat, they will put out a Misswind alert, which goes to all of the emergency management directors across the state. Then they will take action appropriately, whether it be through social media or through their alarm activations for these alarms you've talked about. We also, through the emergency alert system, will put out alerts on your cell phone for those things. And then we also do social media blitzes whenever we have updates. So if you're tracking our website or our app, then we try to put out those weather alerts. And I'm very fortunate to have a number of trained meteorologists that work on my staff as well to do that. So it is not a perfect alert system with regard to the alarms across the state. The counties are eligible to use hazard mitigation dollars to get those alarms and to put them in. But again, our best default is through our emergency management personnel, through social media, and through your cellular phone alerts that you get.
Seeing no further questions at this time, again, I want to thank all of you for being here. Please be weather alert over the coming 72 to 96 hours, and I'm sure we'll be back before you sooner rather than later. So thank y'all. Have a great day. God bless.